I didn't come to Blackcliff Ridge because I believed in fresh starts. I came because the alternative was staying in a city that kept reminding me of everything I'd lost. The cabin wasn't a dream inheritance or a lucky break. It was just a place my parents had left behind, hidden in paperwork and unanswered questions. I told myself I'd stay a few months, fix it up, work remotely, and leave once the ache in my chest eased into something manageable. The first night, I sat on the cabin floor with my laptop balanced on a moving box, answering client emails and pretending I wasn't unsettled. The Wi-Fi worked. The heater rattled. Everything was normal enough. And yet, I kept lifting my head, certain someone was nearby. Not fear. Not danger. Just awareness. Like the air knew me. I slept badly. Always do. Fire chased me through my dreams the way it always had. Heat at my back, my legs burning as I ran through trees that bent but never broke. I woke before dawn, heart racing, palms damp. I didn't cry. I stopped crying about my parents years ago when I realized it never brought them back and never filled the space they left behind. By morning, I decided to act like a person who belonged somewhere. I drove into town, found a small cafe with a chalkboard menu and mismatched chairs, and ordered coffee I didn't really want. The barista smiled too quickly. The man near the window stopped talking when I walked in. It wasn't hostile. Just measured. Like everyone had already been briefed on me. I was stirring sugar I didn't need into my cup when I felt it again. That pull. The one that made my chest tighten and my breath slow. I looked up and he was standing at the counter, tall, still, dressed like he'd stepped out of a private world and into this one by mistake. Draven Nightmoor. I didn't know his name yet, but my body reacted before my mind did. My fingers went numb around the cup. He turned and when his eyes met mine, something shifted. He didn't smile. He didn't look surprised. He looked like someone who'd been bracing for impact and finally felt it land. He took the seat across from me without asking. "You're new," he said. "I just got here," I replied. My voice didn't shake even though everything else wanted to. "You inherited the cabin near the North Trail." It wasn't a question. I frowned. Do people usually know that much about strangers? In this town, yes. There was a weight to him that had nothing to do with size. He didn't lean in, didn't crowd my space, but I felt him anyway. Every movement, every breath, like my body was taking notes without my permission. "You shouldn't stay there," he said quietly. I laughed once, short and sharp. "That's not much of a welcome." "I'm not welcoming you." I studied his face, the restraint written into every line. "Then why sit with me?" His jaw tightened. For a moment I thought he wouldn't answer. Because it would be worse if I didn't. The air between us felt close. When his hand brushed the edge of the table, my pulse jumped. I hated how fast my instincts reacted to him. I hated that part of me leaned closer instead of pulling back. "You should keep your distance," he added. "From the forest. From me." I straightened. I didn't come here to be managed. His eyes darkened, not angry, just heavy with something older. "I know." That was the first time he stood up and walked away from me. It wouldn't be the last. I told myself I wouldn't think about him. I failed at that within minutes. By the time I drove back to the cabin, my thoughts kept circling him, the warning that felt less like a threat and more like a test. I unpacked, set up my workspace, answered calls. Life went on. But the pull didn't fade. A storm rolled in that evening without much notice. Wind hit the cabin hard, rattling loose boards and knocking out power just as night settled. I cursed under my breath and grabbed a flashlight, stepping outside to check the generator. The rain was cold, sharp against my skin. I slipped on wet ground and barely caught myself before I fell. A hand closed around my arm. "Careful." Draven stood there like he'd been carved out of the weather itself. Rain soaked his jacket, his hair, but he didn't seem bothered by it. I should have yanked my arm free. I didn't. "You followed me?" I asked. "I came to make sure you were safe." "I didn't ask you to." "I know." He fixed the generator in silence, movements sure, efficient. When he finished, he didn't let go of my arm right away. Heat spread where he touched me, steady and grounding. I felt ridiculous for how much I needed it. We ended up inside, sitting across from each other with mugs of reheated coffee. The storm pressed in around the cabin, loud enough that conversation felt private by default. "I lost my parents when I was young," I said, not planning to. "After that, I learned not to rely on anyone." His gaze softened in a way that made my throat tighten. "You shouldn't have had to learn that." Something cracked open between us then. He told me small things. About the land. About responsibility. About carrying choices that never stop echoing. He didn't tell me everything and I didn't ask. When he touched my cheek it felt inevitable. When I kissed him it felt like relief. He pulled back first. "This can't happen," he said. "It already did." He rested his forehead against mine, breath uneven. "You feel like home," he admitted. "And that's exactly why this is dangerous." I deserved the truth. I felt that down to my bones. He gave it to me the next morning. Not gently. Not easily. He told me what he was. What I was. About my mother's bloodline, about the wolves hidden beneath the surface of this place, about elders who believed power mattered more than choice. He told me he'd tried to protect her. He told me he'd failed. The betrayal hurt because it came wrapped in understanding. For the first time my dreams made sense. My instincts. The way the forest had always felt like memory instead of mystery. When the elders came for me I didn't think. I reacted. My voice cut through the tension, steady and undeniable. They stopped. Every one of them. The wolves bowed their heads without being told to. I felt it then, not power but recognition. I wasn't broken. I had never been weak. The truth tore the pack apart. Some feared me. Some hoped. Draven prepared to leave, convinced his absence was the only way to keep me alive. I refused to let him decide that for me. I stood before the elders and spoke plainly. My mother hadn't died because she was reckless. She died because she loved. Because she chose a life that wasn't dictated by fear. I won't repeat that, I told them. And I won't rule through force. I changed what I could. I named what mattered. Bonds weren't crimes. Love wasn't a flaw. When Draven knelt it wasn't because I demanded it. It was because he chose me. Morning found us standing together, the town waking up around us like it always had. Cars passed. Phones rang. Life continued. For the first time I didn't feel like I was running. I belonged. And so did he. After that night there was no pretending things could go back to normal. Not for me. Not for Draven. Blackcliff Ridge stayed the same on the surface. People went to work, dogs were walked, coffee was poured. But everything underneath had shifted. I felt it every time I stepped outside the cabin. The forest no longer watched me from a distance. It waited. Draven tried to put space between us. Not in a dramatic way. He didn't vanish or become cruel. He just became careful. Too careful. He showed up when something needed fixing, when a delivery got stuck on the dirt road, when the weather turned rough. Then he left before the quiet could settle in, before my chest could tighten with that familiar fear of being left behind. I told myself I understood why he did it. Understanding didn't make it hurt less. One afternoon a storm rolled in fast, heavier than the others. Rain came down in sheets, wind slamming against the cabin hard enough to rattle the windows. I lost power again, and this time the generator didn't kick in. I stood in the middle of the room, soaked from running outside, frustration burning behind my eyes. The knock came sharp and steady. I opened the door to find Draven standing there, rain sliding down his face, jaw tight like he'd been arguing with himself the whole drive over. "You shouldn't be here," I said even as I stepped aside. "And you shouldn't be alone in this weather." He came in bringing the storm with him. We didn't touch at first. That distance felt louder than any argument. He fixed the generator again, hands moving automatically, but his focus kept slipping. I could feel it, the way his restraint stretched thin. When he came back inside, soaked and quiet, I handed him a towel. Our fingers brushed. That spark was still there. Stronger if anything. It made my throat ache. "You don't get to keep doing this," I said. "Doing what?" "Showing up just enough to remind me what I'm losing." His shoulders sagged slightly like the weight finally got to him. "I'm trying to protect you." "From what?" I asked. "From yourself?" "From me." He looked at me, then really looked, and I saw the guilt in his eyes. Not just regret. Guilt that had been living there a long time. "I'm not safe," he said quietly. "Loving me puts a target on your back." I crossed the space between us before he could pull away. "I've been a target my whole life without knowing why. At least now I understand." He laughed under his breath, humorless. "You think knowing makes it easier?" "No," I said. "But it makes it honest." The storm trapped us there. No excuses. No easy exits. We sat on opposite ends of the couch at first, talking about small things. My work. his investments, the town. It felt normal in a way that scared me more than the truth ever had. Eventually the quiet shifted. I told him about the nights after my parents died, how I used to sleep with the lights on because the silence felt too close. I told him how I learned to depend on myself because no one ever stayed long enough to prove I could lean on them. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "I knew your mother." That landed harder than anything else. She was brave, he continued. And stubborn. He loved fiercely. She refused to let fear decide her life. I swallowed. She died anyway. Yes, he said. And I live with that. The words sat between us, heavy and unresolved. When he reached for me this time, I didn't hesitate. I leaned into him, my head against his chest, listening to a heartbeat that felt too steady to be real. For a moment, everything else disappeared. That moment didn't last. A presence pressed against the edge of my awareness, sharp and unwelcome. Draven felt it too. His body went rigid beneath my hand. "They're here," he said. The elders didn't bother knocking. They stood just outside the cabin, their expressions controlled, their eyes fixed on me like I was something they needed to assess before deciding what to do with it. Fear rose in me, quick and instinctive. But something else rose with it. Something deeper. Stronger. Draven stepped in front of me without thinking. "This ends now," he said. It didn't. They spoke about bloodlines and balance, about mistakes that needed correcting. They spoke like my life was a problem to solve. I felt the forest respond to my anger, the air tightening, waiting. "Enough," I said. My voice wasn't loud. Didn't need to be. Every wolf present froze. Heads lowered. Bodies stilled. Even the elders looked shaken. I didn't understand how I knew what to do. I just did. "You don't get to decide my worth," I continued. "And you don't get to threaten the people I care about." Draven stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Maybe he was. When the elders left, the silence they left behind felt fragile. I sank onto the couch, hands shaking now that the danger had passed. "I didn't know I could do that," I admitted. He knelt in front of me, careful, reverent. "Neither did I." That night changed everything. Not because it made things easier, but because it stripped away the last illusion that I was powerless. I wasn't just something the pack needed to control. I was something they needed to understand. Draven still tried to carry the burden alone. I saw it in the way he watched the tree lean, the way he kept planning exits that didn't include him staying by my side. And I saw my old fear reflected back at me every time he pulled away. I refused to let that become our story. When he finally told me he was considering leaving Blackcliff Ridge for good, to draw the danger away from me, something inside me hardened. "You don't get to abandon me to save me," I said. "That's not love. That's fear pretending to be sacrifice." He didn't argue. He just looked broken. I reached for his hand and held it tight. "If this is my life, then I choose it. All of it. With you." For the first time since I'd met him, he didn't pull away. He stayed. And in that choice I felt the future shift again. Not toward certainty but toward something real. I wasn't falling for someone who kept leaving anymore. I was standing with someone who was finally learning how to stay. The tension didn't fade after that night. It settled into everything, quiet and constant, like a second pulse beneath my skin. The pack didn't come back immediately, but I felt them watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. For Draven to make one. Blackcliff Ridge stayed calm on the surface, but underneath, lines were being drawn. Draven stopped pretending he could leave without consequences. I saw it in the way he moved through the town, no longer avoiding eyes, no longer shrinking his presence. People noticed. Wolves noticed. He was a king whether he wanted to be or not. Still, he kept his distance from me when others were around, as if restraint could shield me from scrutiny. At night, when it was just us, the walls came down. We talked about things neither of us had ever said out loud. About how guilt can feel like a duty. About how loneliness can become familiar enough to feel safe. "I can walk away," he said one night, standing at the edge of the porch, eyes on the dark line of trees. "If I leave, they'll follow me. You'll be free." The old fear rose fast and sharp. "That's not freedom," I said. "That's you deciding my life without me." He turned, pain clear on his face. "I don't know how to love you without putting you in danger." I stepped closer. "Then learn." The elders called the gathering 2 days later. No threats. No secrecy. Just a demand that I present myself. Draven wanted to come with me, I let him, but I didn't stand behind him this time. I stood beside him. They spoke about tradition and balance. About how my mother had destabilized the pack by choosing love over duty. One of them finally said what they'd been circling around all along. She died because she refused her place. The words didn't break me. They clarified everything. She died because you were afraid of her, I replied. And because no one stood up to you. Draven inhaled sharply like he'd been holding his breath for years. I told them I wouldn't erase the past, but I wouldn't let it keep deciding the future either. Bonds weren't weaknesses. Love wasn't a liability. Control wasn't stability. Some of them argued. Some of them listened. The younger wolves watched me with something close to hope. When I finished, I turned to Draven. I won't let you disappear for my sake. If you stay, it's because you choose to build something better. With me. He knelt then, not because I asked, not because the pack demanded it, but because he wanted to. The room went still. The old rules cracked under the weight of that choice. I felt the forest breathe again. Change didn't come all at once. It never does. But it started there in that moment. In the decision to stop running. To stop sacrificing love in the name of survival. Later, as morning light stretched across Blackcliff Ridge, Draven stood with me at the edge of the trees. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of staying. And neither was he.